Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. Our guest today is Nelson Lindsley of Poetry of Plants. You can check him out on Instagram under Poetry of Plants. Nelson has been cultivating cannabis for over a decade and working in the industry for over 2 decades. An artist by heart and an innovator by trade, he has worked with the majority of leading grow room technology and techniques that are available on the current market and studied their application for efficient, large-scale cultivation. Over the past 3 years, he has consulted on cultivation sites in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and California. After working with Nelson, we have added a couple of products to our product line at KISS. We now have lighting from Science LEDs as well as offering Beanstalk nutrients on our website. You know, I put a lot of thought and consideration into carrying this brand because it's not an organic nutrient line. And while I'm an organic gardener myself, I realize that there are many folks who are not, and I wanted to offer what I believe to be one of the most sustainable chemical options for growers. And we discussed some of those reasons in this podcast. If you want to try Beanstalk after listening to this podcast, you can get a 25% discount with free shipping on our website or by entering the coupon code KIS on their website page. This promotion will be in effect for the next 3 weeks from the podcast launch. And if you're a larger facility, we do have access to bulk pricing and options along that route too. Anyway, on with the show. Hey, Nelson, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hey, Tad, how are you?
I am good. You know, we haven't talked on air in a fair while now, but you've been a popular guest. Do you want to fill in listeners on kind of what you've been up to? I think they all kind of know your background a little bit already. So what's been going on?
Sure. So the last year, I've been working on getting a roughly 30,000 square foot canopy, indoor canopy up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with a company called My Tree Genetics. That's been about 80% of my focus as far as things on the cultivation side. I've been working, so that's number one. Number two is I've been working with a lighting company called Science Lighting, doing some grow trials with their spectrum controllable lights. And number three, I've been working on getting visibility for Beanstalk Agriculture, which is a controlled release fertilizer that I was a part of co-developing and bringing to market with a few other great guys.
So you've been really busy is what I'm hearing. And I want to talk about all those things. So why don't we start off talking a little bit about your experience with this facility? What's it like setting up a new facility in a, you know, what it sounds like a fairly challenging state? You want to just touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So in general, startup is really challenging, you know, because you're building something, right? That's kind of how we're looking at it, is you're building something and you're not operating necessarily. So even when you're starting up operations, you're still in building mode, dialing things in. I kind of liken it to like building a guitar, and then once you have the guitar built, you put strings on it, and then you have to tune the strings. So we're in the tuning the strings mode, and we did things a little bit differently with this company. As we started out with a smaller canopy. We were required to do that by the state, that they have some funny rules where you have to, once you get your occupancy permit, you have to have a harvest within 6 months, which doesn't factor in all the things that go into building things out and getting everything kind of ready. So we staged it in a few phases. So last year, right before COVID hit, we started this phase one grow, which was about 1,000 square feet of canopy, where we did a bunch of seed hunting while we were cleaning up all of our genetics and tissue culture and testing everything, make sure it didn't have a viroid or a bacteria. So a lot of preliminary work on the tissue culture plants. So we just started with a bunch of seeds from Compound and Canorado, and then hunted those out, did a couple of drops, and trained the core team. And, you know, COVID hit and all of that. So it just, you know, essentially everybody here became like an extension of my family, because we were existing and living in a bubble. You know, because I've spent the majority of the time out here, not at home, because travel has been tough. And the last 4 to 5 months, you know, and this all the building and the construction was happening for the first 6 larger flower rooms. And then as of last month, we got those flower rooms up and going. And it's challenging enough to get everything operational on a timeline that everybody sets up. It's even harder when things go wrong and you've got incredibly long lead times now, because some of these parts come from China, some of them are coming from all over, and we've had to become very creative on getting to this point with all the challenges with supply chain, with everything else. So it's been a lot of fluid movement and pivoting and in hiring. So we've created around 40 new jobs in Pittsburgh with this startup, and then going through training and educating a lot of non-cannabis experienced individuals, kind of bringing them into the fold. And, it's been great for me because I've been doing this for a little bit, and coming to an area like Pittsburgh and working with a great company that's focused on, hiring diverse individuals, trying to create like a male-female balance of 50-50 in the garden and across the entire company. It's been great to come into this company with that kind of thought process and mission statement to be inclusive in their hiring, and then also be in a community that cannabis has not been, it's been tightly regulated, and for the last 2 years it's only been legal medically, but it did not have 20 years of medical like California. So for everybody here, it's really new and really exciting, and it's been really refreshing to participate in that excitement, and how exciting it is for all these people here to be able to work with this plant. That's been probably the most fun I've had with this whole process. So that's kind of it, long and the short of it. I mean, it's challenging but rewarding is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, and I realize, a project of this scope is probably more than we can really dive into too much on the podcast. But are there any highlights or things that you would, looking back, like things you wish you'd known at the onset that, you could maybe pass on in terms of advice or information, to a listener that's more broad, possibly?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the number one thing in having a successful startup is having open communication on all levels of your staff and management. I would say that anywhere that we've had a failure has been because we haven't been communicating effectively, and creating those paths of communication where it's, you have a hierarchy as far as responsibility goes, but we're really trying to create an open forum for anybody to kind of communicate when they catch something or something doesn't seem right. Some of that can become challenging also when you're working with third parties like contractors or consultants or things like that, where they're not necessarily as open internally as you would be if you're within the same company to just communicate when things are coming up. But that also highlights why your core team has to be really in a high level of communication about every little detail. And there's ways of doing that without having to have 1,000 meetings, because meetings can take up your entire day, and then you're just burned out, and then you have to move into action. You're already kind of gone through all the brain damage of 5 meetings. So we've set up a lot of we've got a handful of social media apps that we use for our communication, and we have just systems that we set up for communicating all the little details that are coming up, all the little questions. And I'd say that's the biggest challenge, is just getting everybody on the same page, because you're going to have unknown challenges that pop up getting things commissioned. And the commissioning process, in case you don't know, is you've got the facility built, and then you have to go into turning on all these systems and ensuring that they're meeting your set point. And when if you're a cultivator setting up a facility, what you have to provide the engineers is your environmental set points, how much water is going in the room, all of these things that the people that are programming your environmental controls. And if you have a chiller plant, something like that, you have to program in how that chiller plant is going to operate based on your desired set points in the room. And you have to provide all this information, and you have to make sure that it's all working right. And, with all the challenges, sometimes you don't get to have all of that time to do all of that testing. and certain milestones kind of overlap into others. So when you're trying to do multiple things at one time, it's really important that you just over communicate with everybody. And that's been probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, is just to constantly communicate. Try not to micromanage. We've kind of dissolved the hierarchy approach as far as how information gets to the owners of the company. And we've created, channels for anybody to bring things up as needed as we're getting things started up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that communication's the biggest thing, especially challenging too for people who really are growers and are used to growing around plants, things that don't talk back, pass on emotions, and have life experiences. And it can be really hard. I know for us, shrinking the business down was actually the best thing we ever could have done. From a stress perspective, from a communication perspective. I mean, I talk to everyone in our company right now every day, pretty much. Sometimes it's little, but we only meet once a week, and to me that's enough. But I totally agree with you that communication is key, because if you're not all on the same page, it's nearly impossible as the scope of the project grows to really be successful or get anything done.
Yeah, I agree with that. Part of the, what I've been doing in the past is, consulting or having my own garden. And I have a couple of guys that I work with, but having to be responsible for the coordination of so many people, so many more people, really, really requires having dialogue and really connecting with everybody. And I look at it as, the staff here is watering the garden, metaphorically and literally, and I'm here to water their garden. And what I mean by that is I'm here to help support them find purpose, find their own skill set, find their own leadership, so they can, improve their quality of life. So it's looking at, not to minimize human beings, I'm always kind of comparing everything to the garden, but I'm just, there's a different skill set that I'm learning that really has to do with cultivating relationships, cultivating communication, and helping people that are coming in that are younger, that want to be in the cannabis space, that are hungry for that, they're excited to be a part of it, and really helping support them in their journey in this space, and doing it in a way where it's an awesome path forward. Because I've seen a lot of gardens and a lot of grows where people are just burned out and not happy. And I think that, that's always going to reflect in the final product. And one of the issues with scale is that there's a lot of big gardens with a bunch of unhappy people. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out how to scale the garden and create wellness with people, where people love coming to work. They get to experience the joy of working in the garden every day, and that's really what I think we're creating here. And I've had the support of this company to create something that I've hoped would emerge out of this space, whereas it's really been kind of a bumpy initial road, I think culturally and I think business-wise. And I think part of that is because the target has been off. It's been about profit. It hasn't been about quality of life, people, or quality. And I think that in the long term, and probably in the short term, shifting the focus away from just short-term gains and into creating just an epic place to be and work and do good things and create quality products is going to pay more dividends than trying to come in, inflate your value and run that whole kind of game. With the stock market and everything else, we're kind of starting to see get exposed now. But that's been present in the cannabis industry for the last 8 years, where it's just been pretty awful. And that really rolls downhill to the employees, and they feel that. So we're trying to, with Maitri, we're trying to do something different. I'm learning a lot. I've got great mentors here that are teaching me about how to be a better people person and a better leader, and leading from the heart and leading from communication. So it's cool to see that in an actual company in the cannabis industry, to say the very least.
Yeah, I know for us, that's been the biggest challenge. Slack's been a really cool tool for us to use in terms of
That's what we use.
Yeah, having these different channels,
Yep.
so like we even have a random channel where right now we're discussing what's going on with Reddit and the stock market, and talking about things along those lines, or current events, I guess. And that's optional. Not everyone has to participate, but it's a way to connect when we're all so disconnected right now with COVID going on. And then we have other channels that are around, what's going on with research, what's going on around, sales or customers, so that like if we have a customer issue, we can put it up in there right away and we can all address it. Now, I realize for a cultivation team, that's a little bit different in terms of what channels make sense, but it's been a great tool for us. I don't know what you said. You're using Slack too, it sounds like.
Yeah, because I'm sure people are going to be curious. So the software or the apps that we found that work the best is Slack for all the communication, and then Mondays for the scheduling and project management. And you can populate changes in Mondays into Slack. So Mondays, as a module for Slack, that's awesome. So if I go in, and Slack is, it's really intuitive, easy to use project management software that's like colorful and intuitive. It kind of looks like a kid's app, but it has a lot of functionality. And so it's easy for anybody to kind of jump in and be able to see where everything's at. There's a bunch of different viewing modes, from just a basic project overview to calendars and timeline and Gantt charts. So all that, it's very deep. And then when you are making adjustments to the schedule, it lets you, even if you're in a task and you get stuck or it's completed, or get auto-populated to the Slack channel that correlates to that Monday's project. So I basically set up different project boards for each room, and those will auto-populate to the channel that we have on Slack that's dedicated to the room. So we organize it. We organize our Slack and our Mondays based off of spaces, and then we have management channels. So anybody that's has activities or objectives in those spaces will have access to them. Then we have like a scouting channel, and of course we have a meme channel, so the staff can meme each other. And I ask the staff to, right now that I'd say there's one employee that we have that has like topped my memes, but we have like a friendly meme challenge where we'll meme each other, and it keeps everything kind of lighthearted. And you can't take yourself too seriously when you're growing, cannabis. It's like the whole part of this is for us to enjoy life. So we create that place for people to be creative and kind of, walk the line per se, which is kind of what I do all the time.
Yeah. So this is where you and Miami Mango are getting all your ammo. It's this meme channel.
Yeah, right. Totally. The meme channel. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I want to add to this is, if you are cultivating on it with a team of growers and you are in a leadership position, I think the two biggest things I found that helped me are kind of really obvious, but giving people a sense of purpose and a sense of ownership are the two things that I found have really made a difference. Because as your scope of company or cultivation expands, you can't do everything. You can't be the one watering the plants. So you have to give people not only the structure and tools and the SOPs to do it well and do it the way it should be done, but also the ownership and sense of value in what they're doing, to where they'll want to speak up and they'll want to do a good job and realize that their part in this company is really important. So I just want to throw that in.
Yeah, no, that I'm 100% with you on it. And that, ownership and purpose, those two things work hand in hand. And that's got to carry all the way through, and the company has to have that commitment to the staff and the employees as well. I would add one thing is I find a lot of companies, especially in cannabis, we're always chasing yield numbers, cannabinoid percentages. Well, those are results. And what I've learned is if you chase results, you tend to fail. But if you chase information, results follow. So if your communication is solid, you'll be able to have access to all the information that will end up leading to the results that you desire. But if you're constantly chasing results and not collecting the data and the information, that's typically where all the mistakes occur and where the failures occur as well.
Great. I think that's a good segue off of the facility stuff, because I want to save some time to talk about nutrients, specifically
Sure.
what you're doing around with Beanstalk. talk a little bit about what that is. And I want to talk to you a little bit about, because you guys are growing using, essentially a chemical nutrient. And you and I have had long-winded discussions about the merits and sustainability of chemicals versus organic production. And I talked a little bit about it actually last podcast that I just put out today on with Dr. Carrie Peters, about the differences there too. But I would love for us to just spend like maybe 5-10 minutes just touching a little bit on that too.
Absolutely. And I've met Carrie. She's awesome. I've spoken to her a bunch, met her at a convention. I think Peters is a great company. And I've used their products a whole lot in the past. So just a little of the background on Beanstalk. 2016, 2017, I was introduced to a few individuals that were trying to get this product off the ground, which is a controlled release fertilizer that's a little bit unique in its coating. The same technology that they developed, that this company behind the scenes, these chemists developed for the NASA International Space Station and the NASA Food Program. It took them about 10 years to get approved for NASA, by the way, so it was a long path. And not anybody can just kind of jump in. And the reason why it's unique is it's really geared towards efficiency and not having an excess in waste. So I was interested in the technology. I wasn't really sure. I wasn't really confident that it would work for cannabis because I'm so used to creating a cocktail of different organic and chemical fertilizers. And so I gave it a shot. I built a small room in my garage, like an 8-liter, and then did a few trials with different control groups. And overall, the fertilizer beat out everything as far as yield, quality, and growth rate, morphology. So I went to the people behind the company, which ended up becoming Beanstalk, was called something else then, and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in being a part of this. I think I can help improve where this fertilizer is at, and bring it to the next level and help bring it to the market." And essentially, the fertilizer is a prill, which looks like nerds, like the candy nerds. So some people call them space nerds, which I think is a cool name. And that prill is a polyolefin coating, and the minerals are on the inside of that prill, and it's a single layer coating, whereas other timed release fertilizers, which is a little difference between control release and time release. Time release can have upwards of 15 to 20 layers of polyurethane. Polyurethane's half-life is very long. Polyolefins is a fraction of that. Also, there's certain fungi and mushrooms that will degrade. If you add that into the compost pile, it'll chew up that polyolefin coating and use it as food with zero impact to the environment. So there's processes in place where you can completely remove any of that coating, after it's been used. The thought behind it is that what we put in the plant is what the plant uses. So how it works is when moisture or water hits that membrane of the prill, the polyolefin coating, through osmosis, it will pull out the mineral salts and feed it to the plant. And as time goes by, different pores open up in that coating, allowing for more minerals to come through at different rates based on how the fertilizer is formulated. So it's essentially the thought behind it, and it's also to remediate, the majority of your leachate or runoff. So in a small container, so containers that are smaller than 7 gallons, I've been able to irrigate with zero runoff and have successful results. If you're using larger containers, you probably still will need to purge the media once in a while to reset it, but it's a little bit better than, or a lot better than, running a straight water soluble fertilizer and having to get 5 to 10% runoff every feeding. So if you go to areas like Central Valley in California, the ppm coming out of the tap there is extremely high, and a lot of that has to do with, or from the well water, a lot of it has to do with just so much runoff going into the water table. That's 2,000 parts per million, a lot of nitrate, a lot of phosphate. So the thought is that not everybody's going to switch over to organic. Organic doesn't work in all circumstances. For instance, here in Pennsylvania is so tightly regulated, I've had to cut out all of my organic inputs for the most part because they don't differentiate between beneficial and pathogenic bacteria. There's a very tight aerobic bacteria count. Fungi, mold. They call it all mold, even if it's a beneficial fungi. So you're in an extremely tightly regulated environment, and using organics is extremely risky. So you might be in a circumstance or situation where you have to pass testing, and you have to try and keep it as clean as possible, and that might involve limiting organic inputs, or really being careful with them. Also, with some of the issues we're seeing with kelp and animal waste, having high levels of heavy metals and arsenic, which I've run into. The organic inputs might have different levels of things that you don't want in the flower. So there's, I'm looking at it as, okay, well, most farms I go to are not growing organically, that I've consulted or worked with. Most of them are running some kind of a salt. How do we make that paradigm more sustainable? How do we reduce that waste? So when this product landed in my lap, I really liked that idea. But then if it didn't grow good weed, then why would I ever use it? I mean, you got to go back to the drawing board. So in the end, we've released a product that's been out for about a year now. It's a slow start because it's a new technology, and people sometimes are confused on how simple it is, which you're just mixing this pearl into the soil, essentially feeding water and whatever organic biostimulant you want. You can stack certain other things on it as well. It's just basically going to give you your fundamental nutrition for the plant, and that's confusing to a lot of people. It was confusing to me when I first was trialing it out, but it really works, and we've had a lot of early adopters with a lot of success. We've run 500,000 square feet of canopy on it with one client, and it was extremely successful, and they've kept using it, and most people that have switched over have just been really impressed with it. And then you can add whatever you want on top of it. I would stay away from any additional nitrogen because there's all the nitrogen you need, and you wouldn't want to add any more late in the flower, in my opinion. But overall, we're having great results. I'm using it here. We're testing extremely high on the cannabinoids. If you look at the Maitri Genetics flower that just dropped, we're between 28 and 32% on the cannabinoids, with 3.5, anywhere from 2.8 to 3.5% terpenes. So great results there. I think most of that has to do with genetics, but if you don't have the proper nutrition and the proper environment, you might not see that expression. So everything's really doing its job. It's producing a flower that's desirable. And I'm pretty stoked on the product and the future of the product.
Yeah, I mean, to jump in here, obviously I'm the organic guy. I've been organic my whole life. I eat organic food. I've never grown using chemical nutrients. It's not really my world, but I want to be pragmatic about this and realize, like you said, that, I don't know what percentage of growers are using chemical nutrients. I would suspect it's a higher percentage than those using organic nutrients still, though organics has made a huge push, I think, in the last decade. This is all anecdotal. I don't have any numbers here. But that's just sort of what I've seen on my side of the industry. I'll continue to be that organic advocate, but I want to realize that people are going to grow using chemicals. And if if this is not going away, how can we be more sustainable about it? And I think, companies like Jax, ideas like Beanstalk are really great in that aspect. And I'd like to further those technologies, further that information so that we're reducing runoff, reducing water usage potentially, like you were saying in that, and really simplifying things for growers so that we can get better quality product out there too. And frankly, I root for the little guys. I don't want a more general hydroponics and Scots and big ag taking over our industry. So these small companies, or smaller companies, I guess, are really where I would throw my hat in on this. So I just want to throw that out there. One other thing I wanted to mention for people who are not...
Can I comment on that real quick, though, before you shift gears?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that I wouldn't say that I'm in either camp, as far as what I would prefer. I really look at it as what's going to work the best for that scenario and the best for the goals. And I love organically grown cannabis, and I try and eat as much organically grown produce and food as I can. And really what it is we have these containers we have to operate in, and the containers are like the rules, the regulations, the limitations of the environment, and then also scale. Right, scale is another container that in general I don't feel like the cannabis industry has really figured out yet. We're getting there, but we usually hit like a point where the quality dramatically drops after a specific amount of square feet of canopy. So how to get to that next level so you can figure out all those problems, part of that just involves simplifying everything. And I just find that sometimes I've run into issues or organic inputs have brought in another layer of complexity that makes the other aspects of scaling really challenging to manage. But I do know that there are people working on that right now and focused on that, and they might be in a market where they have margins where they can afford to take that chance. Just not everybody is in that position. And I love seeing what people are doing with organic inputs. And frankly, some of the best cannabis I've ever smoked has been, organically grown. And I think a lot of people agree with that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm for organic, 100%. But I'm also for the transitioning into sustainability. And sometimes that means not necessarily picking a side, but really looking at like how do we progress further away from things that are so wasteful.
Sure. And I think that, the organic industry has its dark side too, which, we talked about actually last podcast with Carrie. It's not perfect either. Some of the mined products, some of the, I think taking advantage of some of the native populations around harvesting of some of these things, whether it's guanos or cocoa core, things like that are really important to consider when we look at environmental impact. And at the end of the day, like nitrate is nitrate, and we have to recognize that from a plant, a plant physiology perspective. As an organic grower, I have to realize that the plant honestly can't tell a difference on where that's coming from. And I think that's a hard lesson or a hard answer that we don't necessarily want to accept. We want to think that organics is special. And where I think organics is special is in the sense that it's I don't think that we have completely mastered what microbiology brings to the table, what soil brings to the table. This idea that we can grow a perfect plant with a limited number of chemical inputs, I don't think we're there. And I don't know that we ever will be there because it is so complex. So that's where I think organics has a slight edge. But you're right, you are adding complexity. And one of the things we talked about with Carrie was that research that's being done right now is all being done with chemical nutrients. It just, because it is easier to control for variables, it makes the scientific method so much simpler. And so it's really hard to get good organic research, and it's hard to get replicable organic research because every soil is going to be a little bit different. So there's definite advantages to using mineral salts or chemicals. And I want to acknowledge that, even if that's not my path. But if on my path, I can help encourage people to grow more sustainably, even if it is with chemical nutrients, then I'm on board for that. So,
right on.
Yeah. What I was going to get at though was regards to Beanstalk, this controlled release fertilizer. For people who aren't as familiar with it, because I wasn't, but as someone who's owned a nursery, would get plants in with Osmocote in there that has these little bluish green balls that slowly break down over time. I realize that what you're saying here, time release, is different than control release, but just to give you a visual of sort of the concept behind it, I thought that might be useful for people.
Yeah, that's where the space nerds comes from, because they look like little they look like tiny little balls or little malformed. I'd say the big difference with the big difference, which also reflects in the price between Osmocote and Beanstalk, is the type of coating. Having a single layer, higher quality coating with the Beanstalk. That's the biggest difference. So it's the same technology that they use, for NASA, and the reason is that the polyurethane isn't as there's other issues with the polyurethane. One of the temperature affects the release rate, and what we found is with the polyurethane, if you have a soil temperature fluctuation, the fertility can dump out. So the polyolefin coating is going to be more stable, and it's just overall just a higher quality product from a chemistry level, without having, polyurethane is going to, essentially break down into microplastics, which is a problem because we don't know what the impact of microplastics is with soil biodiversity. They could shape the evolutionary path of the microbes. There isn't a defined way of remediating that. So that's something that we're seeing in soil, and it's something that we're seeing in the ocean, and it's something that I'm exploring and how we can ensure that even though we do have a much shorter half-life with the polyolefin coating, is there a way of remediating it and processing it sooner, so it's not hanging out, having some kind of negative long-term impact that we can't see.
So in theory, what you're talking about is having a media that at the end of the growth cycle would be essentially depleted to the point to where your EC and everything is back at where you started, is sort of the ultimate goal there?
Correct, and that there's no residual coating left. And so if you were to use, like, for instance, the Osmocote, you could deplete everything, but there would still be that residual polyurethane. And we don't know the impact of that, right? So that's the dangerous, part of the issue that we have with scientific discovery is that we might come up with something that solves a short-term problem, but creates a problem 200 years from now that we can't see, or even sooner than that. And that's where we have had such an ecological impact with so many things that we've done with technology. There's always a consequence, there's always a cost. Like, where there's a benefit, there's always a consequence or a cost. It's never separated. There's always this balance. And so part of the challenge with utilizing new sustainable technology is finding systems to continue to create balance so you don't have a long-term path. And I've looked into the data, I've looked into the research, but it's really just beginning as far as microplastic content in the soil. So one of the things that I look at, even with this product, and being a part of the company, putting this product out, is really doing a deep dive on any possible thing that could have an ecological impact, that we wouldn't see right now, right? So I look into that, and I look at all the benefits, but I'm also looking at the cost, and that led me to specific types of fungi that can break down polyolefin. They're already started doing trials on it. So there's a way of taking all of that spent media, right, and then composting it and inoculating it with this fungi, so it would basically use that polyolefin coating as its food source, and break that down and turn that into something that would be beneficial.
So you're not recommending or at the point of reusing the media at this stage of the game?
No, we've been reusing the media. I'm just saying that I've been reusing the media in indoor environments, or primarily outdoor environments. Like, I try not to reuse media indoors unless you heat treat it, but I would take the media out, and we've used it for outdoor gardens and had a lot of success. Would I till it back into the soil? That's the question, right? Like, I want to have all the products we're having be able to be used for multi-purposes. So whatever the waste is, how do we turn that waste into something that doesn't just necessarily have one home after it's been used for our purpose, but could be used for multiple different things. So part of what we have to create with sustainability is fluidity and flexibility with our waste. If it's only going to create one product or one purpose after it's being used, you might hit a bottleneck where you meet the demand for that one purpose, and then it just sits there and it becomes waste again. So part of looking at it is like, we're using peat or cocoa, is there a way of reusing this in multiple different applications with the lowest environmental impact possible? And I'm getting pretty granular on this, but this is how deep I look at it. Part of what's happened, and part of that came from just my family, my family background, where my grandfather was in the insulation industry in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, all the way through, and they were using a lot of asbestos at the time, right? And at the time, asbestos was widely accepted, and then the 80s hit, 70s, 80s hit, and then they found out that it was pretty toxic, and everybody that was involved in manufacturing, distributing, or selling asbestos was considered liable for what happened to the people that got mesothelioma. I believe that's what it's called. So looking at that, I look at my grandfather's life as like a lesson, where he went from doing incredibly well in life and essentially had to pay out everything he had made in his life to all these lawsuits. So I wouldn't want to ever run into anything like that. I wouldn't want to ever be a part of a product that would have that long-term impact. And I think that if companies if we start thinking about that way, it's like being a conscious company, like thinking about all the possible impacts that your product can have, and then figuring out a plan to remediate it, or don't put it on the market if there isn't a way of remediating it. And I think that would solve a lot of problems overall for everybody on the planet. So just thinking about it a little bit differently.
All right, so take me through how to use it. So, starting at the beginning of the grow cycle, I've watched in horticultural greenhouses, when they're doing like massive propagation, you poke a hole and they throw like a handful of Osmocote down in that hole, and then that plant's done, and they go on to the next plant, and it's really, really fast. But what are you guys doing with your mix here? How do you use the fertilizer?
You could use it in the same application, but as that fertilizer releases, it's going to be concentrated in one point. So what we recommend is to integrate it into the substrate or medium. I prefer a specific type of peat moss. I like this peat moss formulated by a company called Pinstrip. It doesn't have any perlite in it. It's got a lot of oxygen, so I prefer that. But with any type of loose substrate, it won't work in rock wool. It doesn't work in rock wool, but for any kind of loose substrate, you can either mix it into the pot or you can subdress it. So you could transplant, and then you could add the layer of the prill, the CRF, on top of the level of substrate. Then you have to add an inch of substrate on top of it. So you want it to be in contact with media that's been irrigated or has a moisture content level. I have top dressed it before. It worked fine, but you're going to create a better balance of EC in the media if you integrate it in or subdress it.
Okay, so you'll put some in. I take it fairly early on. Are you putting some in with like a new seedling, or do you wait a little bit? When does it go into media?
Yeah, so if you're starting from clone or seedling, most people are starting with some kind of a rooting cube or a rock wool. It's not going to work for that. So this would be on you're potting it up. So if you're taking it to like a quarter gallon or half gallon container, you would add the V basis, which is the veg fertilizer. There's a specific rate per gallon. So for V basis, it's 25 grams per gallon. For a little starter, 3.5-inch starter pot, I usually just throw a teaspoon in there. And then when you're bumping it up to the next phase up, then you would, add in your complete blend of the Fortify, the Absolute Flower, and the K-Boost, and that's going to finish out the rest of your veg time, and with enough fertilizer to finish a 70-day cycle, so roughly 90 days. So I like to do that last up pot at least 2 weeks before I'm moving into flower, and then it carries through.
Now, I did notice you had like a K-Boost or a couple other things there. Are those just top dressed at targeted times?
You add them all in at the same time. So they release. Okay. Yeah, you add everything in at the same time. That will carry you through flower. If you're just going to be doing nursery production, you just need, for moms, you can use the V basis or the Absolute Flower. Absolute Flower is going to work great for vegging. It's just the timing and the formulas formulated with the K-Boost, with the Fortify. So the K-Boost has your basically a high level of potassium with some magnesium in it, and the Fortify is essentially calcium nitrate. And then the Absolute Flower is an aggregate of your macro and micronutrients. So you add all that in at the same time and you're done. You don't need to add anything else. So other than that starter pot, if you're taking a plant from a starter plant into flower, you're just going to amend that fertilizer into the soil, and you're good to go. And if you're doing a longer veg time, it depends on how many up pots you have. I don't know if people are doing like 3 or 4 up pots. Maybe they are, but you would just add as the volume needed. And so let's say you have a 1 gallon pot, you would add 25 grams of the V basis. And let's say you take that 1 gallon into a 5 gallon. Well, I would only add fertilizer for those additional 4 gallons, not for the total 5, because you've already added in for that 1.
Oh, that's really easy. That makes sense. Yeah, so I just want to mention to folks too, so this was something that I had to put a lot of thought into. I'll just be transparent about it. Knowing you, knowing the guys over at Beanstalk, watching your process in formulating and improving this product, thinking about, being an organic-based company, knowing that this is not an organic product, but yet more sustainable. It is something that we're adding to our product line, so people will be able to order it through our website. But it took a lot of thought on that, because I realized I'm probably gonna get some backlash on it, knowing that we are an organics company, and I want to stay an organic based company, but I do want to promote technologies that are more sustainable than what's currently available on the market. And that to me was more important than being, this organics versus chemical nutrients debate. But it took a lot of thought, or, it was it was not an easy decision on my part. So I just want to throw that out there to people to just kind of stave off some of the comments or questions that people may have. And I'm happy to, elaborate on it. But I just want to.
I appreciate you you and I have had some great conversations on, just about life and sustainability and this product too. And I just appreciate you doing the due diligence and even considering it, so it's exciting to work with you at any level on this. And I hope you don't get any backlash, and I hope people understand that, we're all trying to figure out the best path forward, and, it's not black or white. It's somewhere in between on getting the whole world in a better place.
Yeah. And I want to have solutions for people in some of those challenging environments where, like you said, I can't, organics isn't always a good fit. And some of that is just poor regulatory practices. I want to blame, that some of these state laws are just, they're not good. Yeah. So we could start there, but, knowing that we do have to fit into this box, there are definite advantages to running a facility with less microbial inputs and, a media that's a lot, that's either sterile or a lot more controlled.
I agree.
Yeah.
The amount of challenges just with getting all the systems working right, and, teaching all these new people, how to do the fundamentals. And then you factor in that you could have a really gnarly explosion of, a bacteria that you don't want in your flower. That could happen late flower. It's not a fun place to be, especially when you put a bunch of time into a crop and it looks great, and then you fail testing. That's like the worst feeling ever.
Yeah. So speaking of testing, you've done testing on heavy metals with this product?
Yep.
Is that something that's publicly available?
I don't know if it's on our website, but I don't have an issue sharing it with anybody. So we're all within we're all in the right limits. I know there's been people that have hit me up about it, and I've sent those results. We've had testing by batch, so we're maintaining the quality control as it comes from the manufacturing partner. And so it's all been acceptable, and I haven't seen anything bioaccumulate that caused a failed test. And anything that I'm doing here, which has been, this is the tightest regulatory system I've worked in Pennsylvania. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so on the organic side, when it comes to heavy metals, well, first of all, in order to register as a fertilizer, which is something the path we went with the soil and our products legally, you're supposed to do that. I know not all companies have. There's one selling, bloom kits and things like that that haven't registered. I hope they do. But essentially what that does is it gives you access to, publicly available heavy metal levels too. Like you can go on the WSDA website and look at my company and see the heavy metal levels in our products. That's a requirement. So I'm sure, as you're registered in these states that that's publicly available too. Because I know that was something you guys were working on. In regards to heavy metals and organics, I know you mentioned kelp meal. Dr. Carrie Peters mentioned gypsum. These are things that you have to test. Soil Doctor Consulting, Bryant Mason's been doing some testing on that, which he shared some of that with me. So this is something we're constantly working at, but I don't want people to freak out and think that, kelp's going to cause their plant to fail for arsenic. It's about management. So not overusing any of these things and just knowing what the heavy metal load is that we're adding, and also managing our pH in a range where those things may be less available, and then running cultivars that are going to be better at navigating heavy metals than others, not as efficient at taking them up. So I just want to throw that out there.
That last one's so important, because I have definitely run into cultivars that do like to bioaccumulate everything you throw at them. So that is an interesting note.
Yeah, I've seen people fail for some crazy things in their rooms, and I'm working on putting together a better guide for that, because there's just so many variables that can contribute, from dust to water to your plumbing to your soil to your other inputs. I heard one, and then this is still speculation, but I heard one lab claim that the pH down that this person was using was particularly high in certain heavy metals, but I'm waiting for those lab results. And I wouldn't share them anyway, because I'm afraid of this company. But just the idea, I want people to be aware that, like, oh, shoot, pH down. I never even thought that might be something to consider. So in regards to heavy metal, because I think heavy metals is really the next hot topic. We're not testing our vegetables at this level, which maybe we should be or not. But we all have to pass if we're growing in a state that has these requirements. We have to fit into these requirements. So, I think
it doesn't matter. The impact matters, but if the state has these regulations, whether they're for good reason, an ignorant reason, or there is some scientific basis that's just not available to the rest of us, we have to work within these guidelines, and it's extremely difficult. It's like, oh man, really? You can't use this product? Why not? We have certain things. I don't want to get in trouble by blasting it all out, but like there's certain things that, like, we can't use peroxide for certain things. That it's mind blowing to me. Like, it makes zero sense, and peroxide's fairly safe, just on like cleaning rock wool up or anything like that. There's just a lot of restrictions, a lot of tools that they take out, and there's no reason for it. And sometimes if you even ask them why, they get upset and then just won't pick up the phone for you anymore. Because they just might not have an answer. So in some of these states, we really, I wish that in general, scientists and people that study things at a granular level. I'm not really a scientist. I'm a cultivator. I just play a scientist on TV or on Instagram. And I like to hang out with real scientists and ask them a bunch of questions. And I feel like I owe, a lot of my success to a lot of people that have a lot more understanding about granular things than I do. But we really need, if there are scientists listening to this podcast, people in specific fields, I know that most of you, I'm going to speak to you right now, I know most of you don't like to be out in the limelight and vocalize your thoughts. But right now we have so much crazy information. I implore people that are experts in a field to be courageous right now and to, help all of us that are trying to operate in this world. And this is across everything. Please just, be more vocal. We need more scientists that are more vocal. I think there's a huge void right now where we could have a lot of people coming out and talking about things and educating, the cannabis community and everyone else on what the science and the data is telling us.
Yeah, I'm working on tracking down a really good chemist who specializes in water and can really explain the interactions between different types of water and how they affect uptake of some of these, specifically heavy metals, but nutrients in
I
general.
might I might be
So,
able to help you with that.
all right, well, let's talk
So
off air because I've got some calls
yeah.
into Dram and Suzanne and some other people that are working on tracking down that like perfect podcast guest. So that's in the works. But
Okay, cool.
yeah, in terms
Cool.
of
I was
science. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I'll just give a little shout out. The water treatment company that we used for this facility was called Advanced Treatment Technologies, and they've put in a pretty cutting edge water purification system. We're able to deliver a high level of dissolved oxygen to the plant, and then use ozone for all of our cleaning protocols and keeping the lines clean. And this was a team member here that recommended this. I was coming from the tissue culture side, and I'm incredibly impressed with that system and with the amount of knowledge that they brought to the table on this project. And I would say, bark up that tree. They're doing some interesting work, and on like a scale level for agriculture and on like a laboratory level. And Charlie over there at Advanced Treatment Technologies really came through for us here with Maitri, and what they're doing with water purification and plants is pretty incredible. And I'm seeing the results now. Couldn't be more excited.
Very cool. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on your science comment. So I think science is a little bit dogmatic. There's a lot of people doing what they think of as science and research, and that gets a little tricky because I found people throwing out stuff that doesn't fit with sort of their worldview, and that's one of the reasons that I'm trying to have people like Dr. Peters and yourself on the podcast, is to try not to get stuck in that sort of dogmatic view where I only look at one path to growing this plant, because I think we can all learn from each other, and I think we have to do a better job as cultivators of discerning and really listening to what people are saying and running kind of that bullshit meter on it. Yeah, you can have a fancy graph, you can have different counts of things, but at the end of the day, if the overall premise doesn't add up, or if they claim that this is the only way to grow a plant, then I think we have to take a step back and see why some of these things haven't made it into horticulture. Not to say that if it hasn't made in horticulture, it isn't good, but that is a good test of sort of that BS meter in a lot of ways too. Just to throw that out there.
Yeah. And if we're not following the data, we're not following, scientific method, and from moving from a hypothesis to a theory. If we're not following the system of science, and we're just leaning heavily on anecdotal and story, right? That's where con man and hucksters thrive. And I think right now in the world, we just have a lot of people that can be very charismatic and convince a lot of people that things work based off of an idea. They might mix in some spirituality in that, which I think is a real abuse of spirituality. I don't think you need to sell spirituality. I think that's just like spirituality is like a representation of how we're connected to everything that's alive. And that at some point science will be able to explain that, but maybe not right now. But it's, the cannabis community is, ripe for being taken advantage of by a lot of people that are coming in and selling products that really don't have any evidence of them being effective. And just because there's a white paper written about something doesn't mean that it's proving a claim. It means that there's an abstract and there's an exploration, and that's just the beginning. But I see like people posting abstracts up, but not posting any of the data to support claims that they make around specific methods or technologies or products. And that's not how, that's not how if something works or not. So just be really careful and take your time if you're making big purchases or investing in anything, and know that there's not data behind it. Well, who knows, really? So be wary. And I just hope that more people that study the data are a little bit more vocal about it and can do it in a way where they can communicate, even if people are getting, upset or triggered, for lack of a better word, that this data might conflict with their worldview. We just don't take it in that personal. That's where people are right now, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't say something, and just understand that you're going to be communicating with a bunch of people who just don't know or have another narrative in their head or another story of how things work. And that's a real challenge. But, I love talking to scientists that study things on a granular level. I've learned so much, and that's improved everything that I do in this space as a grower.
Yeah, I feel like we're at a time in history where there's never been more polarization in our society. And I feel like the last thing we need in the cannabis industry right now is to be fighting over, dogmatic views. At the end of the day, we're all trying to grow a plant as to the best of our ability. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. But in the name of science, I agree. First off, just a quick plug. We do have some white papers on our website. Feel free to read them, read the methodology, run your own experiment. We're sharing as much data as we can, trying to get stuff published, but that's hard to do, partly because we're running things in a commercial facility, and a lot of the research journals don't want that. They want stuff done in a controlled lab, which we don't have the ability to do. So we're doing research with Legit. We're doing research with Gold Leaf Gardens here in Washington State because I have access to both those facilities. And that's really good. But this brings me to my next question. So I want to do some research at home. I'm limited here within Washington State to anywhere from 6 plants to 15 plants. I might be able to get up to 30 if I can do a cooperative at my location, but I'm researching the laws because I want to be legal within the medical program here in Washington. But how do I set up the ultimate tent grow from a scientific perspective? Because I want to test out Science Lights. I want to test out, your fertilizer versus our soil mix and do a comparison there. I want to look at how different MBAR levels, using the blue mats that we like, with our soils will create different results. So there's all these different things I want to test. I mean, the list is longer than my lifetime, but I want to start doing this and documenting it and getting some trends going so I can figure out, hey, this is worthwhile. Send this over to Gold Leaf Gardens, but because I can't do some of the more exciting projects, I can't really run at these facilities because I can't risk the crop loss. They're mixing it in. This is a for-profit business. I have to be really cognizant of that. But we're formulating new soil mixes, some new grow and bloom formulas, things like that. And I'm really excited about that side of things, but I want to be able to do some of it in-house myself. And I miss growing the plant. It's been a few years off now. I've been focused on KISS. I've been wanting to be a good law-abiding citizen as we were going through all these different law changes in Washington. I've been too busy, but now I feel like I'm at a point where I'm ready to start growing again. So
yeah,
what are you thinking?
And I think I saw your last garden actually. If I'm correct, I think that was your garden, but I don't know if you want me to talk about it. But
I think you saw no, that was just some outdoor plants for my dad to make into a texture.
Yeah, well, some outdoor monsters. I remember that.
Those were purely for my dad's neuropathy. We don't, I don't care if at the end of the cycle they have a little bit of PM or something.
It was cool. It was cool. So that. If you're going to set up the Ultimate Tent Grow to do comparison, I guess you have to choose, your sample size of plants. If you could get away with the sample size of 6 plants, that would probably be great. And if you're just going to do a side-by-side, so 6 plants from the same cultivar, so you'd want that to be consistent. I'd probably take 2 to 3 times as many clones that you would use, and then select the ones that are the most homogeneous, so you're getting a good comparison, meaning they have similar root development, similar health levels going in.
So you would take those, and then you would randomize them technically, and then distribute them. But my thought would be, so here's what I'm thinking, and then maybe that would be easier, and then you can tell me what you think. So I want to make sure that the environment is the same. So essentially we're trying to control.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
For a variable. So my thought was, let's just say I can do 15 plants. So if I register with the state, the medical card, I can do 15 plants. I would get I would get them from a licensed facility. I would get them as clones. And then I was going to run two, at least if I want to trial the soil stuff, I would run two 4x4 beds in a 4x8 tent. And then let's say I wanted to test lighting. I would just run something down the middle to kind of limit some of the light overlap in the beds. But I didn't want to have two. Initially, I started with I want two separate tents because I want to make sure everything is very controlled in that regard. But then I started thinking about that, and I was like, there's no way I can keep VPD exactly the same environment in two separate tents. They really need to be in the same tent.
I wouldn't do a fertilizer trial and a lighting trial at the same time.
No.
So I would,
totally one thing or the other. I've kind of jumped around there. I'm talking about multiple cycles at this point. But let's just say, let's just simplify it. So let's say I wanted to do a fertilizer trial. So same lights, same cultivar from clone, randomized in the same. Well, okay. Let's say let's make it even more specific. Let's run beanstalk versus our biochar soil. I would have our biochar soil. Well, this would get a little trickier because I'd want to grow it in a bed because we've seen better yields with a bed. But I guess we could look at the two methodologies.
But you could grow beanstalk in the bed too.
I wouldn't necessarily need to, though. I could grow it in, a 7-gallon pot and say this is, the Nelson program versus the TAD program, I guess. And we could compare that and talk about the pros and cons of, weight.
But why not do it? You could do it in the bed. It would be interesting to do it because you're going to have a different. You would have to do your biochar soil in the same pot, so you have to keep the container consistent. So if you want to do it in a bed, I would recommend doing the beanstalk in a 4x4 bed too.
I don't think that's necessarily a variable that we'd have to control as much, but we could. So let's say even then we had two beds. So so assuming the light's the same, how am I controlling an environment like that? Ideally, if I want to keep it within the tightest conditions, would I even try and run a small CO2 sort of thing? Because the other thing is this garage is insulated, but it's not heated. So my outdoor air is going to vary. Like this time of year, it's probably around 50 degrees.
Yeah. Well, if you don't run CO2, the CO2 factor is just going to give you a higher yield, and you'd be able to run more light, right? So, you'd be able to probably get above 800 ppfd without having, some big issues, if you were to run the CO2. So, but if you're going to keep the environment stable, you needed some sort of an environmental controller and sensor, like a Hydrox Pro from Trollmaster works great. Then you need a way of feeding cooler air in. And if you kept that tent closed, that would positive pressure the tent with an inline fan and some carbon filters on the inline fan. And then you could use
carbon filters on the inline.
If you're pulling air in, you want to make sure it's clean.
Oh, so you're just cleaning the air. You're not talking about from an odor perspective then.
Unless you have to, but no.
I don't, but I've always run negative pressure because in the past I had to.
Okay, yeah. So for this trial, it's better if you're running positive pressure. And if it's in a room, you wouldn't really be able to inject CO2 if you're using that fan to control that airspeed unless you were adding CO2 to the room that the tent was existing in.
Could I run it sealed, though? That was what I was wondering. Can you run a sealed room that small? Maybe that's a silly question. I don't know.
Not really, because you've got to have some kind of you've got to have cool air coming in, right?
Sure.
So what you could do is you condition the room outside of the tent, and then you use like a voltage control, like a potentiometer, to control the speed of the fan that's moving the air into the tent. You understand? So you would use that fan the same way that a fan from an air handler, and then you would get your room temperature that the tent is sitting in where you want it, and then you push that air in, and then you could add CO2 into that room. But but you'd have to seal that room.
That's the challenge. Is I can't do that because it's a garage. That air is just
then I wouldn't run CO2.
So I was wondering, could you run it sealed, more or less, quote unquote, but then just do controlled air exchanges every so often to bring in fresh air. That was kind of what I was thinking of. And again, I've never done it on. on scale, sure, on a room, but I didn't know if anyone's done it in a tent or if that was
You
even
could,
practical.
but then you could, but you'd only be getting, that CO2 wouldn't hang out very long. Because anytime, so let's say you have, a little control brain like the Hydro-X, and then whenever the temperature gets to a certain set point, you're going to kick that fan on, and it's going to suck the cold air from outside of the tent and push it through. You could program it to when that fan turns off, that the CO2 then would release into the tent. But anytime that fan turns on, you're just going to be pushing that CO2 right out. So you're going to get some benefit, but it's not going to be the same thing as like a sealed room running it at 1,500 parts per million.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how well that would scale down to something that size. I was just curious.
A lot of people have played around with it. I've played around with it. If I'm doing testing, I just don't run the CO2, and I try and stay below 800. I'll hang out between 600 and 800 ppfd.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a light meter. I'm curious to try LEDs because every time I tried a tent in the past, I've pretty much failed. Usually because I ran too strong of lights and just could not control the heat, no matter how much airflow or even with like an 8-inch air-cooled ducting with a massive fan on there, I could not get the heat down low enough to where.
Was it with LEDs or what were the?
No,
bulbs?
this was a long time ago. This was back in the day with single-ended HBS, and I remember I roasted some plants. They actually survived better than I thought they would have, considering the heat pressure they were on. But I way back when I first started, and people will probably laugh at me for this. I threw 1,000 watt in a tent and ramped it up, and came back the next day.
Did you run it at 100%?
Oh yeah. I had a Lumitech ballast going. I had it all the way up there. It was cranking. Yes. Thing was so bright.
Oh man.
And I came back and opened up the tent, and it was like I had just stepped into like tropical paradise. It was so hot. But that's how you learn.
It's nice when it's cold.
I'll admit my mistakes.
Yeah, that's totally. No, I've made all those mistakes before. 100%. So
I went from that to like a 400 watt CMH, and that worked fine. But it just wasn't enough PPFD that I felt like I was really getting the growth I wanted. So I usually just ended up saying, screw this, taking down the tent, and then just setting up my garage is really what ends up happening.
How big was that tent that you had the 400 watt CMH in?
That was a 4x4, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So that one was a 4x4, and that was okay. But then I ended up being like, screw it. I'm just going to take everything out into my garage and hook up the thousands and really let it go to town. And that's what I've done every single time I've done a tent. I've taken it down halfway through the grow because I just get fed up with it. So
do this, Tad. Use like a 300 watt LED. Use like the veg light,
But I don't
like
want
Fluence
to.
has a veg.
I want to go with
but you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't need that much light, especially if you're not running CO2 and you're going to have like a moderately controlled environment. If you get that like a 600 watt LED or 650 watt LED, you're going to probably end up just dimming it down because it's going to be pretty tight to the canopy. And I've grown under the veg lights, like from Spec Grade and from Fluence, and I've gotten, 1.5 ounces a square foot, without CO2. You just don't need that much light, especially if you're just doing a trial. You don't need that much light for something like that. You do need more light if you're trying to like maximize every square foot that you have and you're trying to optimize everything. But in a tent for personal use, I don't know. You could go ham on it, but it's not necessarily needed in those kinds of circumstances. And if anything, that extra light without added CO2 and environmental control is just going to cause uptake issues and imbalances in the media, and then give you, probably not as accurate of a trial as you desire,
Yeah, I'm curious to start playing around with it. And ultimately this tent setup would just be for me to get trending and some numbers so that I could then take it to a facility and say, hey, run this again in your facility on a little bit bigger scale with a little bit more controls. But this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. And, I think, KISS has really been focused, I feel like overly focused on the commercial side of things, like commercial growers. And I don't want to discount people that are growing at home. I think some of the ways that we grow have a lot of applications for home. And I think the science that we're using in our soils and things like that can definitely apply to someone with 6 plants as much as it could to someone with, 600 or 6,000. So,
and if somebody wants organic product, they might have to grow it at home if their market is so tightly restricted they can't buy it. That's the other option, right? So if someone's really hell bent on only consuming organic product, they might have to be, in their tent in their garage or room somewhere.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's people listening to this podcast that are a lot smarter than me that probably have feedback. Feel free to send it to me. I haven't
hit the DM
purchased anything yet for this tent grow, but I'm getting ready to pull the trigger. I've already got a few lights lined up that I'm going to run for one thing that I know I want to trial. We've already trialed a few of them at Gold Leaf, and I've got that data, but I haven't wanted to publish it just yet because it's such a political market around lighting, and I don't really want to, have people run to too many conclusions based off of these trials, and also feel like I'm, bashing one company and promoting another. So I'm trying to be real careful around that, I guess. I will say that the LED trials that we ran, all 3 LED companies crushed the double-headed HPS in yield. So that was
well,
good.
I can tell you this too. Like 90% of all the LEDs on the market are like coming out of one factory in Shenzhen. So it's like there's not a ton of differentiating factors. There's
price.
Just like the warranty, price, the warranty, and then the architecture of the light. And then there's a few companies that are doing things differently and doing a lot of like I like Science a lot because they have a manufacturing plant in Texas and they're building these lights, putting them together in America, and I'm super stoked on that. But most of the lights are coming from a few factories in China, and they just put a little bit of a spin on the casing. So it's tough to, unless you really kind of dive in and open up the light, it's tough to know what's different about all of them, in my opinion.
Well, based on your recommendation and a few others, that is one of the lights that I'm definitely, it's top of the list to trial. It is one that I was just talking with Cindy about adding this to our website today to be able to offer its customers. So we will have that as something if you're looking to try Science lights, you can get them through us. So we're going to have that. And then BIOS is another one that I've worked with for a few years and I have a good relationship with them.
Good company. Yep.
I don't know what's happening with my relationship with Fluence right now, but we're not currently offering their lights at the moment, but they're still around and a good company too for people. And then there's like a whole bunch more. I was talking with Ben about this. Like, I would not want to be in the LED space right now because there's a million companies out there.
It's oversaturated.
One literally just mailed a light to my door the other day for no reason. So I'm like,
isn't that awesome?
I'll trial it. Like, I'm going to give it a run.
Totally.
They were a spinoff of a well-known company. So I don't want to say anything about them until I've actually tried their light. But there's a lot of great options out there now under lighting for full spectrum lighting. So it's wonderful because when we first started, there was nothing. Like, there wasn't anything. It was just blurple lights. Yeah. And then people were laughing at full spectrum like it was a waste of money. And now we've seen that's not the case. And then there really wasn't a lot. Initially, the only 2 companies I ever heard about were Fluence and BIOS. And now, I know that some companies have had supply issues, but there's just so many more options.
It really is. And I would say that both Fluence and BIOS really kind of paved the way for that market, and it's crazy how quickly it exploded. I mean, the Jungle Boys has an LED room now, and they have their own LED light. And I remember like 6-7 years ago that they were never going to switch over to LED, and it was like this whole thing. And you just seen people all over adopting this technology and figuring it out, and just crushing it. And just absolutely crushing it. And there's all these new, there's companies that are doing all kinds of crazy things with LEDs now. So it's cool to see. And I think all that competition is hopefully going to inspire more offerings and more features and cooler stuff. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
I totally agree. I have nothing to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well,
Awesome.
I feel like we're already running a little long on this podcast. I know you and I, when we get a chance, we can usually talk for a fair bit of time. Though half our conversations aren't even about growing. It's pretty crazy, the stuff that we end up talking about.
I know.
Which I
next
enjoy.
Podcast we're doing, next podcast, Tad, I'm going to interview you.
There you go. And, since we still get asked and we're both on here, I do have hopes for Dope History. I'm trying to track down a sound engineer in production. I've got a few leads I'm working on, but I'm really looking for someone that can buy in on this concept at the ground level and help us get it off the ground. I know, Nelson, you've been really busy, but you're hoping to plug back in on it too.
Absolutely.
So if you're someone that's willing to do a little bit of sweat equity and help get this thing off the ground, reach out,
Please help us.
If that's your background.
Please help us.
I've already got some interviews.
Yep.
We've got the connections. We have an audience. It's such a great idea. I really want to crush that one. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, please. Yep. Thanks, Tad.
Yeah, I didn't warn you I was going to bring that up. So there you go.
No, it's fine. I would love to see that get revitalized, and it's pretty much all my fault is why it hasn't happened. So you can blame it all on me. I got too busy.
I wasn't going to go there. It's all good. Life throws.
I'll own it. I'll own it.
So
I'll own it. It's all on me.
Well,
sorry, guys.
I appreciate the chance to catch up with you. I know you're super busy. I'm excited to hopefully reconnect with you on even this Dope History thing once this facility is really up and going. I know it's really consumed your time. And I hope folks will check out Beanstalk on, like I said, it's going to be offered through the Kiss Organics website or the Beanstalk website directly. I'll have the links to that as well on the podcast page, as well as a promotional offer for people when this podcast comes out, if they want to give it a shot.
Awesome.
I think that's it for today. Awesome. You got anything else to add before we sign off?
No, it's good, man. It's good talking to you. Thanks again for the time, and lots of love to everybody out there that's crushing it during this crazy moment in time. We're all doing it together. So best of luck for this year, and hopefully your gardens are green.
That was Nelson Lindsley, and you are listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. Don't forget to check out the podcast page at www.kisorganics.com. Just click on the Learn tab, then Podcast. Beanstalk Fertilizer is available for a limited time at a 25% discount with free shipping on our website, and we have added a bunch of new products including LED lights, plant sex kits, new surfactants, and much, much more. We carefully research all the products we offer and manufacture to make sure they are science-based and meet our standard of quality. Thanks for listening.